It started with a conversation. She smiled. You listened. She opened up. You felt special. Not just noticed, seen. You told yourself this was different, that she was different. But something deeper was happening, something you didn't have words for. Because Jung never said we fall in love with people. He said we fall in love with our own projections. You weren't seeing her. You were seeing your anima, the hidden feminine inside your unconscious mind. And when a woman mirrors that inner image, even just a little, it doesn't feel like meeting a stranger. It feels like coming home. That's why it hit so hard, why her presence felt like purpose, why her absence now feels like death. She wasn't just attractive, she was magnetic. Because she awakened the part of you buried beneath years of being the strong one, the logical one, the man who never needed anything. But suddenly, with her, you needed, you felt, you hoped. And in those moments, you weren't falling for her personality. You were falling into a version of yourself you didn't know existed. Carl Jung called this anima possession, when a man is overtaken by the unconscious feminine within. It makes him emotional, idealistic, sometimes irrational, because he's no longer thinking with reason. He's thinking through a wound. And that wound says, if she loves me, I'll finally be whole. You started texting her goodnight, waiting on her replies, changing your plans just to be nearby. She never asked for any of it, but you gave it anyway, not out of strength, but because something in you was begging to be completed. And when she pulled away, when she disappeared, you didn't just feel rejected. You felt abandoned by a part of yourself. That's what most men never understand. It's not just about her leaving. It's about the collapse of the identity you built around her presence. So ask yourself this: were you ever really in love with her? Or just with a version of you that only existed in her eyes? You didn't fall for her strength. You fell for her softness. Not her voice, but what it unlocked in you. That warmth, that safety, that sense of finally being allowed to collapse. And that's where Jung's Anima Trap begins. The anima isn't just your feminine side. She's your inner gateway to emotion, creativity, connection. But when unconscious, she becomes projection, obsession, illusion. You saw her as salvation, but she was just the screen onto which your soul cast its oldest longing. Please, love the part of me I've never learned to love myself. That's why it felt like fate. Why you mistook chemistry for destiny. She didn't just enter your life, she activated you. But not as a man, as a boy, still waiting for the mother to come back and say, you are enough. So you poured into her. Texted her first, said yes when you meant no, offered softness when she needed strength, not because you were weak, but because the anima in shadow made you believe that her love was your wholeness. Carl Jung warned, when the anima is unconscious, a man becomes possessed by her. You weren't thinking anymore. You were fantasizing. Building futures in your head with someone who barely saw your present. And when she ghosted, rejected, or said, you're too good for me, it didn't just hurt. It felt like a part of you died, because your entire sense of self was living in her gaze. But that gaze was never yours to control, because she wasn't your salvation. She was your mirror. And the love you gave her so freely was really the love you've been starving to give yourself. So ask yourself this: was she ever really that special, or was she just the first one who made you feel like you were? She wasn't the woman you thought she was, and deep down, you always knew that. Because what you loved was not her inconsistency, not her confusion, not the way she drifted in and out of your life. What you loved was the glimpse, the rare flash of something sacred, something soft, something almost spiritual. That moment when she looked at you and the world disappeared. That night she cried on your shoulder and let you see the girl beneath the armor. You told yourself, that's who she really is. And the rest? Just trauma, just fear, just noise. But that wasn't truth. That was projection. You were in love with her anima, the idealized feminine energy that lives inside every man. And when you met a woman who mirrored it, you didn't just see her, you saw completion. Carl Jung called this anima inflation, when a man projects his entire inner world onto the first woman who makes him feel seen. But the anima is a liar when left in the dark. She doesn't show you truth. She shows you longing. She doesn't say, this is who she is. She says, this is who you hope she could become. So you ignored the signs, the manipulation, the passive aggression, the way she used your empathy to escape accountability. You called it love, when it was really imagination. You said, she's just hurt. She needs time. She's afraid of real love. And maybe that's all true. But here's what's also true. You weren't loving her. You were loving your ideal. And when the real woman failed to live up to it, you blamed yourself, tried harder, held on tighter. But she wasn't the angel you met in your psyche. She was human, flawed, and simply not ready to hold what you were offering. Jung said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And maybe that's what broke you. Not her actions, but the realization that she was never the person your soul believed she was. So the question is, if your anima chose her, who was the you that chose to ignore everything else? She wasn't your soulmate. She was your symbol, a mirror you desperately needed. Not to see her, but to see yourself in a way you never could on your own. You filled her presence with every missing piece of your own story. The warmth you never received, the validation you always craved, the softness you weren't allowed to express. You called it love, but it was mythology. A fairy tale sculpted by the deepest wounds in your unconscious. Carl Jung warned, as long as the anima is unconscious, a man will be a slave to the woman who embodies her. And that's what happened. You weren't loving her. You were worshiping a projection, an internal goddess dressed in the skin of a real, flawed human. She didn't ask for that, but you gave it anyway. Because deep down, you weren't searching for love. You were searching for yourself. You told your friends, we had something real. But did you? Or did you just finally feel alive in the presence of a woman who mirrored your unconscious anima back to you? For a moment. She wasn't your salvation. She was your mirror. And when that mirror cracked, when she ghosted, betrayed, or distanced, it wasn't just heartbreak. It was identity collapse. Because you didn't just lose her. You lost the man you only knew how to be when she was around. The patient one, the listener, the protector, the savior, roles you assigned yourself not from power, but from longing. Longing to be seen, to be valued, to finally be enough. But here's the truth Jung understood. When we love from the wound, we don't love the person. We love what they represent. And that's what makes this kind of heartbreak so disorienting. Because you weren't just grieving her absence. You were grieving the fantasy, the hope, the unfinished sentence you wrote inside yourself and waited for her to complete. But no one can complete that for you, especially not the projection of your anima. So ask yourself this: if she never truly was what you imagined, what part of you was so desperate to believe in the illusion? You thought she was the cure, the ending to a story that had always felt unfinished. She came in and lit something up, a fire you hadn't felt in years. But she wasn't the conclusion. She was the ignition. Because the anima doesn't show up to complete you. She shows up to awaken you. Carl Jung called this process individuation, a journey of becoming whole by confronting the unconscious parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding. And that's exactly what she triggered. Not healing, not harmony, but conflict, friction. A psychic disturbance that forced you to feel the parts of you that were still lost. You wanted her to fix that ache, to look you in the eyes and say, "You're enough." But her role wasn't to heal you. It was to show you where the wound had always been. You felt it when she laughed at something he said, but never reacted the same to your thoughtfulness. You felt it when she told you, "You're such a good guy," but still kept her heart elsewhere. And you told yourself, "If I'm just a little more patient, a little more calm, she'll see me." But the deeper truth? She already saw you. And what she saw didn't activate her. Because she wasn't designed to. She was just the mirror reflecting how far you drifted from your own center. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege doesn't come through her love. It comes through your suffering. Because the pain you feel now, this ache, this loss, this disorientation, isn't the end. It's the beginning of becoming. Becoming the man who no longer looks for rescue in someone else's eyes. Becoming the man who no longer needs to be chosen to feel whole. Becoming the man who integrates the anima, rather than chasing her in every woman who makes him feel alive. She wasn't your answer. She was your alarm clock. So, now that she's gone, will you keep searching for another reflection, or finally look within for the one who's been missing all along? Let's be honest. You weren't just drawn to her beauty. You were drawn to what she awakened in you. A flicker of meaning in a life that had started to feel flat. But that spark, it became a craving, a quiet dependency, and you called it love. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's what you did. You avoided yourself by clinging to her, because it was easier to obsess over her texts than to ask why silence feels like abandonment. Easier to analyze her moods than to face your emptiness when no one is watching. You didn't need her presence. You needed her distraction. A distraction from the parts of you you never learned to sit with. This is what Jung called possession by the anima. When she's unconscious, she doesn't guide. She dominates. She becomes an addiction. And you chase women not to connect, but to escape. Real-life micro-scene tone. That's why you overthink her hey, why a missed call ruins your day, why you feel unworthy the second she pulls away. Because your validation wasn't rooted in self, it was outsourced, leased to her attention. And when it stopped, so did your sense of worth. That isn't love. That's amnesia. Forgetting who you are when no one is mirroring you. The anima isn't meant to complete you. She's meant to lead you inward, toward the broken boy you left behind years ago. The boy who only felt safe when he was needed. The boy who became nice because being real never felt allowed. Until that boy is seen, held, and integrated, you will keep chasing love that feels like rescue. And every rejection will feel like death, because you're not grieving her. You're grieving the self you never learned to love alone. So ask yourself, was she really your home, or just the shelter you used to hide from the storm within? You spent so long trying to be the man she could love, the one who never raised his voice, who always said the right thing, who stayed calm even while breaking inside. And when she left, you thought you failed, that if you had just been softer, quieter, more patient, maybe she would have stayed. But Carl Jung reminds us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and that's what you avoided. Not her, not rejection, yourself. You rejected your fire long before she did. You buried your anger under smiles. You called your silence maturity. You disguised your fear as kindness. But what if your niceness wasn't virtue, but strategy? What if being good was just your way of avoiding conflict? Your way of begging for love without risking who you really are? Think back. How many times did you say yes when everything in you screamed no? How often did you apologize just to keep the peace? How many versions of yourself did you abandon just to remain in her orbit? That's not love. That's erosion. The slow grinding away of your truth. Because a man who cannot hold his own edge will always outsource his identity to the nearest woman who pays attention. And when she leaves, he won't just feel heartbreak. He'll feel annihilation. Because she didn't just leave. She took the mask with her. But Jung didn't want us to be masks. He wanted us to become selves, whole, integrated, dangerous even, but in control. When you stop begging for her light, you find your own. And it's not polite. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't need to be chosen. It chooses itself. So the question is, are you still waiting for her to reflect your worth? Or are you finally ready to see it without her? You thought wholeness would come when she finally chose you. When she said, "You're different. You're enough." But that wasn't wholeness. That was dependency, disguised as hope. You thought healing meant finding someone who loved you so purely you'd never have to face your own emptiness again. But Jung's work tells a darker truth. The path to wholeness doesn't start with being loved. It starts with being broken. Because only in the breaking do you finally see the parts of yourself you've been outsourcing to others. That wasn't just her you lost. It was the fantasy that love would save you from doing the work yourself. She didn't destroy you. She revealed the cracks. And in those cracks, You found something ancient, untamed, unfiltered. The man you've always been, beneath the roles, beneath the performance, beneath the nice mask you wore just to be accepted. You remember that night, alone, no calls, no "I miss you," just you, a quiet room, and the terrifying question, who am I now? That was the beginning, not of heartbreak, but of individuation. Jung called it the meeting of opposites, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, ego and unconscious. And when they collide, not gently, but violently, something new is born. You. Not the man she needed you to be, not the boy who needed to be mothered, but the one who owns his darkness and still walks forward. Wholeness isn't perfection. It's not peace. It's not the absence of need. It's the presence of self. Even when everything you thought would complete you walks away. So ask yourself this: was she your healing, or just the wound that finally made you search for it? You've been haunted by the wrong question. Was I enough? It plays on loop. In your sleepless nights, in the silence she left behind, in the echo of everything you gave just to be dismissed like an afterthought. But what if that question was never yours to carry? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And maybe that's what this was. Not rejection, not betrayal, but a brutal mirror, a reflection of the parts of you you never wanted to face. The dependency, the need to be chosen, the hunger to be seen by someone who didn't even see herself. You weren't evaluating her. You were too busy trying to be evaluated by her, to be crowned worthy by someone you made into a judge instead of a partner. But here's the cost of that longing. You never asked the real questions. Was she emotionally mature? Did she inspire growth? Did she make me feel respected, valued, safe? No, because you were stuck in a performance, trying to become her definition of lovable, instead of checking if she even deserved a seat in your life. She wasn't your test. She was your reflection, the external proof of the internal belief that if you just give more, fix more, soften more, you'll finally be loved. But that belief was never yours. It was planted in you by a childhood wound, by a forgotten moment when you felt invisible and decided that love had to be earned, never received. And maybe the real tragedy isn't that she left. It's that she stayed just long enough to make you forget who you were before you started chasing her approval. So now ask yourself, did she break your heart? Or did she break the illusion that being enough was ever something she could decide? It hurts. Let's not pretend it doesn't. But pain is not always punishment. Sometimes it's permission. Permission to shed the mask, to stop performing, to stop waiting to be chosen by someone who was never capable of choosing themselves. Carl Jung called it individuation, the breaking of illusions, the reunion with the self. The moment a man stops seeking worth in the eyes of others and starts embodying it. You thought she completed you. But what if she only reflected the hole you refused to fill? You thought love meant sacrifice. But sacrifice without self-respect is just self-erasure. You thought being the good man was the answer. But goodness without power isn't love, it's submission. So now you're standing in the ruins of who you used to be. And for the first time, there's no one left to please, No fantasy to chase, no mask to wear. Only the raw, unfiltered, untamed version of you, ready to rise. You don't need her validation. You never did. What you needed was to remember who you were before the world convinced you to shrink. You weren't too much. You weren't not enough. You were just misplaced inside someone else's story. Now it's time to write your own. So, if something inside you stirred while listening, you're not broken. You're waking up.